The White's Bear Micropub on Southbourne Grove is a proud supporter of AFC Bournemouth and sponsor of all departments. Head to the Bear for real ales, locally produced food and plenty of good conversations about the cherries. Check out www.thewhitesbear.co.uk. Hello, my name's Michael and this is All Departments.
Here come the cherries and we're heading for the top of the tree. Bournemouth is a team that's going to show Division 3. Here come the leaders and the scorers at the Saturday, showing how to win the Southern way. So we sing, come on Bournemouth, come on Bournemouth. While you're out there winning, hear the shouting and the singing. We sing, come on Bournemouth, come on Bournemouth. Here come the cherries, here come the cherries, here come the cherries, number
Hello and welcome to All Departments. Our much-loved Cherries lost 2-0 to old friend Southampton in the pantomime derby on Sunday evening. Here to discuss a game of at least two halves is Chris Cherrett. Chris, how are you?
I'm good, thank you very much. How are you doing?
I'm all right. Another defeat yesterday. We'll talk about the details of the match in a moment. First, I just wanted to mention the build-up to the match. It was all about the nature of the derby. Was it a derby? I guess it was because of the geography. Was it a rivalry? Well, not so much for them as for us. Where do you stand on all that?
As a starter, if I hear one more Saints supporter give me a condescending conversation about how Saints have always had a soft spot for Bournemouth, and how in the past at games whenever the Bournemouth score was read out, their fans would cheer and stuff. If I hear that story one more time, I might scream into my pillow because I'm sure it's lovely if it's true, but it just sums up the attitude there, and the thing about the way that they see us and the way that we see them. And so ultimately, I think geographically, yes, it's a derby, but culturally, obviously, there's a divide there that can only be solved by us eventually beating them and giving them a reason to dislike us that little bit more.
Yeah, I think they do dislike us a bit more than they used to. Like you said, they were, I think, for many years labouring under the misapprehension that we were the nice little club down the road, and they had no knowledge, unless they were living in the Bournemouth area, that we may not have been totally warm in our feelings towards them. We played in blue yesterday in a possible attempt to make them think it was a bigger match to them than it previously would have been.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that we've become an irritant to them now, as opposed to a rival, and that could be the start of a rivalry potentially. And like you said, we'd have to get some results against them, because at the moment, I think the situation at present is that we're just kind of like we're almost like a bothersome fly or something that they just want to swat away, and we're kind of just an upstart that. And as far as they're concerned, every time we've played them in recent history, we met them a couple of times in League One, and we played them in the League Cup that season as well, and then we played them yesterday. They always win. So from their point of view, we're still not enough of a threat to them to really be a proper rival. I mean, it feels like our recent and continuing to develop rivalry with Watford is bigger than the one with Southampton. I mean, growing up in Bournemouth and going to Dean Court week in, week out for most of my life, you certainly develop a little bit of a rivalry in your own head, at least with Southampton. But then, of course, when it comes to playing them, it just isn't. It isn't like you just know it isn't like when Portsmouth play Southampton. You just know it isn't that type of game, don't you?
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, it's when it comes down to actually the game, and I'm sure we'll get into the detail of yesterday's one. That there's still some way to go for that to be an entirely typical matches as they would see it between themselves and Pompey. I do try and put myself in their shoes and think, well, I mean, if this was the other way around, let's imagine Poole Town being a close team to us, who was at the moment we would consider nowhere near our level. But if over the years they were able to, go through the divisions, arguably a lot further than we had to do, and they saw us as a rival, I wouldn't really begrudge them that. That would be who are we to say what one club can consider a rival? I've got nothing against a club wanting to build a rivalry. That's what football is. I don't see it being a problem allowing that to develop. But the way I see it at the moment is that Southampton really don't want us to be a rival. But I don't see why not. What's the problem? Why can't we enjoy that? Why does that have to be a bother? Why are we a fly that they wish to swat away? Surely that's what football is, isn't it? Embracing that sort of rivalry, and that that's what matches are for.
Yeah, I think if they didn't have such an intense rivalry with Portsmouth, which is sure. It's one of, I mean, you can sort of tell the size of a rivalry if you can measure it in size between football clubs. If it will spill over, and this isn't a good thing, but if it will spill over into really stupid and hateful behaviour. Fortunately, we haven't reached that stage yet. Maybe one or two little things, but certainly not. You've got. I mean, there's all the big rivals. I mean, Rangers and Celtic are obviously the classic example, but then there's all the others: Swansea and Cardiff, Norwich and Ipswich, etc., etc. It just goes totally over the top. The behaviour of some of the fans, and I don't really want that to be the case, but that is the indication of, unfortunately, that is one indication of a real rival. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see what develops. Hopefully we can stay in the same division as them for a while, because there's no point having a rival if you can't play them anyway, which is hopefully will work in our favour as well, because they may not be playing Portsmouth for a while. But as we've seen, things can change very quickly over the course of a few seasons. Anyway, on to the game. I was walking up with my youngest son. It was his first away game yesterday to St Mary's, and looked on my phone. The team had been announced, and yeah, a few interesting selections. Probably the one that stuck out the most for me was not only Federici playing, but Boritz not even making the bench, which suggests, if it was down to his injuries, that he perhaps wasn't fit when he played against Spurs, because if he wasn't, they said on Match of the Day, the commentator, I think it was Jonathan Pearce, said that Boritz had picked up an injury in training, but I don't really think he had all the facts. I think, as we know, Boritz couldn't start against Manchester City, and ever since then his fitness has been in doubt, and he didn't play yesterday or even make the bench. So I'm a little, can't go back in time and do anything about it, but I'm a little concerned that his performance against Tottenham may, in some way, although his eyes weren't injured and his arms, it was his thigh, have been impacted upon by the fact he wasn't 100% fit.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think injury or fitness was the reason to not be involved yesterday. He would have been on the bench had it just come down to a niggle here or there. So I think there is something more there. Unfortunately, I missed the game with Spurs. Missed my first home game for a long time, so I didn't witness it firsthand. But the thing that's, injury aside, the thing that stands out about Boruc at the moment is that I think a lot of people will say that there's unfortunately a mistake in him somewhere, and there will, over the course of a season, there will be a mistake that happens. I can think back to Brentford last season with the way he handled Pritchard's free kick, but that was his mistake for the season done, because he makes up tenfold for it everywhere else by being a fantastic goalkeeper. The thing that worries me now is that we are, how many games are we into the season now? And we've already had 3 or 4. And that's the concerning thing. And if injury is a part of that, then that speaks for itself. But as we saw at Liverpool, Federici did a good job there, and I think he was well deserving of his spot at the weekend. So it'll be just a question of if Borac does get fit again, and how long that is, will he depose Federici, or is he still Howe's number one?
Yeah, I was expecting Federici to start yesterday. I wouldn't have put my mortgage on it, but I definitely probably would have favoured him over Boris, although we'll come on and talk about Federici's performance in a little while. Eddie also stuck with the back four that he played at Liverpool, which was a bit of a reshuffle in that, in the absence of Tommy Elphick and, Steve Cook, we had Sylvain Distin, who'd been starting anyway, and then Simon Francis playing centre-back. I thought he did okay overall, although we miss him partnering Matt Ritchie, and then Adam Smith playing at right-back. Now, on the subject of Steve Cook, after the Liverpool game, Eddie gave an interview, I can't remember where it was, which outlet, but he was asked about playing Francis in the centre, and then part of his answer, he said something along the lines of, and these weren't the exact words, but if people aren't performing in a way that suggests they deserve to be in the team, then they won't play. And so Steve Cook has been reported, and it might be true, of having a twisted ankle or whatever it was. Although it wouldn't be the first time, if Eddie is pulling a fast one, that he's deceived the media and everybody else. I mean, I suppose you could say, well, if Steve Cook had just been dropped, then he would have been on the bench. So, I mean, that gives some suggestion that Eddie was telling the truth. But I don't know, I've sort of been a little bit suspicious about Cook and his injury. I wonder how injured is he? I mean, for all I know, they might announce in the middle of the week that he's out for a couple of weeks, and then I'll be regretting saying this. But I just think that, I don't know, it was just all a bit kind of, he wasn't playing that well, or certainly the whole defence weren't. And then Eddie said that in that interview, and then he's not in the team at all. And I think, I like Steve Cook a lot, but do you think he's injured, or do you think Eddie's dropped him?
I'm erring on the side that he's probably injured. Tyndall, I think some noises came from him during the week as well about them having to potentially make some changes because of some niggles here or there. I agree that I think if he had been dropped for performance, he would have probably been on the bench, because at the end of the day, he is one of our two key centre backs, and for him to be omitted from the squad entirely for reasons other than injury, I can't quite see happening. Also, on the fact that Francis as our right back is so much more influential as a right back, and I agree. I think he had a perfectly good performance in the two games he's played in the centre there. But as a right back, I think we lose a lot more from him not playing at right back than we gain from him playing in the middle. And I think that showed slightly yesterday, in that there were occasions I could just see him. I don't know whether I was imagining it, but I could see him drifting off to the right in a sort of desperate attempt to play with Ritchie. There was something there where because that partnership is so naturally good, that I couldn't help but feel that naturally he doesn't want to be in the middle there. But as I say, I might be reading into that too much. But I think ultimately, for Cook to not be on the bench says to me injury. And it's just another question mark of how long is that for, if that is the case. Yeah,
I suppose he had Eddie put Bailey Cargill on the bench, who he's clearly got quite a lot of hopes for going forward, and he'll need to blood him in the league at some point. But yeah, I think you probably you've talked me out of my suspicions. I think there may be some truth in the injury, but you never quite know with any football manager. So and Eddie's certainly shown in the past that he's not afraid to be economical with the truth, shall we say. The good news, of course, was Harry Arter was back in the midfield. First league game, he came back in the League Cup defeat at Anfield as well. And I thought, although reports that I read afterwards in the local and national media suggested we were totally outclassed in the first half, I wasn't feeling that way until the goals started going in. We did okay. They had a lot of possession, admittedly enough. I think at one point they had I think maybe after 30 minutes, 69% of the possession. So this suggests they might have been totally on top, and they did have a few chances. But I thought we were. I suppose I was measuring it against the previous two league games against Manchester City and Spurs, when we were totally outclassed. in the first half of both games, and the game was over at half time in both cases. And although Southampton were certainly in charge yesterday in the first half, and then we'll come on to the goals in a moment, I didn't think we were swamped, and we just couldn't cope in the same way we did in the previous two league games. I mean, admittedly enough, we had to throw a few blocks. I remember Sylvain Distin and Simon Francis blocking shots from Mane and him hitting one into the ground that went over the bar. But I thought overall, although it wasn't anywhere near our best, and I'm talking about the half hour leading up to the goals, I didn't think it was as bad as perhaps has been suggested subsequently. What did you think?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's those last 15 minutes of the first half that really set the tone for what's being presented here as a very dominant first half from Southampton. And I agree, they started really well. There were those couple of chances from Mane that one just went over the bar, I remember, or maybe both of them just went over the bar. Certainly one of them, he had this really good opportunity that he just hit into the ground and it just bounced over the bar. So yeah, there's no denying they were definitely the best team in the first half. And then once that goal, and then certainly the second goal went in, that was when I went, is this going to happen again? Because that first half hour, whilst they were in control, it wasn't the same, concerns as we saw against Spurs and Man City. It wasn't that floodgates weren't opening. But once that second goal went in, just 5 minutes after the first, that was when the concern set in, and half time, the game was over. And then the second half obviously was a completely different story, and that was what set it apart from the previous two games.
Yeah. Just before we talk about the goals, there were a couple of things prior to that caught my eye. The first one was we got a free kick. Adam Smith went on one of his trademark runs where he cuts inside, and that was when he was fouled by Wanyama. That was when Wanyama picked up his first booking. And then we had the free kick, and it was an opportunity for a shot on goal. And it was. I said to the guy next to me, "This has to be Richie," because it would have been, right on his left foot. And so we tried to pull this slightly complicated routine, which totally didn't work. And it was such a shame because those things are great when they come off, but we so needed to have a dig at their goal. And Richie's got such a good left foot. I thought it was an opportunity wasted.
Yeah, I agree. And I our routine that we've had in the past of stepping over the ball and someone coming in late into the box, I think we've been sort of lucky in that we've seen some really creative pieces of set pieces from Eddie over the years, and that one yesterday just really didn't work, and it was not what we needed at that point. We really had to make more of that opportunity, and it's always a shame, especially in grudge matches like that, where you feel that anything that sort of doesn't go to plan, comes off as a little bit, poor, sort of gets highlighted or exaggerated to the point of almost embarrassment. And that's not what you want to see. You want to see some really good quality attempts, and that, unfortunately, was not one of them.
And we mentioned, of course, the inclusion of Federici in goal, and he only let 2 goals in. Neither of them were really his fault. But I was a bit concerned about his desire, if that's the right word, to punch instead of catch the ball. I mean, he spilt one against Man City and Bonnie just nipped in and put it in from about half a yard out. But punching is a risky strategy, because if you get a full punch on the right part of the ball, it's generally no problem. It's as good as a clearance. But it is so fraught with danger because it's difficult to get a full punch on the right part of the ball. You can quite easily hit the wrong part of the ball. Someone can challenge for the ball and, just prevent you from punching it properly. It just goes off at a funny angle. It slips, whatever. I mean, there just seems like there's 1,000 things that can go wrong. And he did it a little bit against Liverpool, and I don't know what Eddie's told him, but I mean, it's easier said than done. But I would feel a lot better if I knew Eddie had said to him, "You got to cut that punch now," because every time he does it, I think, "Oh no, here we go again."
Yeah, I don't think I've seen as much punching from goalkeepers as I have this season. It seems to be happening a lot from both keepers as well. But I think that one particular occasion I'm thinking back from on Sunday where a cross came in or something was happening in the box, and it just really did present itself as an opportunity to catch the ball and keep it. And I remember it just getting punched out out of the box to the right hand side, if I remember correctly, and everyone else just amazed that was the decision. But I think rather than, it's easy for me to sit here and criticise that, and any professional goalkeeper will listen to this and go, you don't know what you're talking about. I think that the thing to take from that is it goes to show that maybe the position that we're in, the need to not concede, possibly the nervousness or frailties in defence are coming across in actions like the goalkeeper's punching, because anything to get that ball away is potentially the decision that's coming ahead of catching it or whatever. So maybe that's a reason for it, but certainly. Given an alternative scenario, that was there were occasions there when punching is not always necessary.
Yeah, he did keep out. Marnie had a header, and he kept that out with what was essentially a punch, and that was a punch that was a good save. There was a couple of others that, worried me quite a lot, and I think what you're saying is correct. His punching, the punching by the goalkeepers, is one symbol of our lack of confidence in defence. Yeah. And I'd much rather he caught it, but anyway, it's I guess it's for him, Neil Moss and Eddie Howe to sort out. But we'll just have to wait and see if that changes in future games. Anyway, he couldn't be blamed for either of the goals. They scored both goals in quick succession just after half an hour, and they were both goals were highly praised by. Eddie Howe said they were really good goals. He said we conceded some goals recently where we only had ourselves to blame, but he said that they were quality goals and Southampton would be pleased with them. Ronald Koeman obviously was pleased, and they were also praised on Match of the Day last night when I watched it. But I'm I'm going to be the dissenting voice on this and maybe a bit hard on our players. But I think there is a few things that we perhaps could have done better. The first goal, it was a slick move. And Pella played it to Bertrand, who we were all shouting offside. When you watched it back last night, he was definitely onside. And then he crossed it into Davis, who finished first time at the back post. But watching it a couple of times, we just didn't appear to be tight enough on their players. Gosling let Bertrand go and then kind of looks around, and it doesn't seem to know where he is. By this time, Bertrand's got the ball and he's about to cross it in. And then the ball goes in, and we've got 5 defenders plus Federici in the box. Davis is in the box. I'm not sure if any other Southampton players are in the box, but I couldn't see them on the picture. And then he just pulls into this gap between Distan and Daniels. He's got far too much space. And then, he finished it first time, which is never an easy thing to do. But for all the comments, and most of the people who made these comments are more qualified to do so than me, I really thought we didn't gift them the goal because they had to get all those things right that I've just described, but we gave them far too much space to do it. Yeah, that's the thing that stands out for me. I really remember Davis really pulling out into space at that back post. I've not watched it in great detail. I tend not to be able to watch it again on games that we lose, so I haven't watched a lot recently. But yeah, I do remember him pulling out into some space there and just being able to stick out that leg or make a good connection with it. And it was a good cross and good build up. But I agree. I think you do feel like there are some aspects of that build up where things tend to be falling apart ever so slightly, and that's where the difference is really being demonstrated between what attacks are able to do against our defence at the moment. Yeah, and then it certainly felt that our heads went down for a little while, and this is a little while did not end soon enough because they had the second goal by the time we lifted our heads up again, and they could smell blood now. Southampton, I think they thought, right, well, we can get at least another goal before half time, maybe more, kill the game off, and we're playing against a team that have been shipping goals left, right, and centre recently, and we were clinging on, but not successfully, because we conceded the second goal 5 minutes later in the 36th minute, and Mane sent a looping ball out to Tadic on the left wing, and he controlled it well, and then he took it right to the byline and crossed it in. He was being jockeyed by Adam Smith, but Smith was unable to block the cross, and then Pella, whose danger is in the air, headed in. But again, having done my usual thing, I watched it back 2 or 3 times and watched what everybody does. Again, we had 5 defenders in the box and Federici, and Pella somehow he just drifted in from the edge of the area. Nobody picked him up. Nobody got behind him, which I think was the biggest crime. He was in front of Distan, and again in this gap between Distan and Daniels, and he was just able to head in, and we just weren't properly organised. It was quite a surprise because watching it back, you see the little. Well, it's not even a run. Pella just trots into the area from the D, just across the penalty spot, and then he's on just perhaps 8 yards out. They all know he's there, but nobody's picking him up properly. He did give Distan a little push, but that's like neither here nor there because stuff like that happens all the time. But there wasn't, again, and really any other Southampton players in the picture, and he was able just to get what was essentially a free header.
Yeah, I think I remember that correctly as well, is that Pella was basically the only player in the box there. And I think Distan actually ended up on the floor, which must take a lot. But I think also what we can't forget is Pella is basically Italy's main striker at the moment, and it may be a slight doing him a disservice in the fact that I don't want this to sound like unfair, but in that he only plays for Southampton. I think he's a better player than that, and I think a lot of Southampton fans, their main concern over the next transfer window or in the summer is that Pella, in the typical Southampton exodus, Pella will be one of the next ones to go because he could go back to Italy and play for one of the top clubs. So for all our defensive misgivings, at the end of the day, that he is a top class striker who has possibly in the very fact that he's managed it on his own or drifted into the box there. If anyone's capable of doing that, it's him. And for us to not necessarily handle that as well as some other teams might do, or to not handle that is maybe not that surprising and was potentially coming. But yeah, a good strike all round. But of course, there's always opportunity for us to defend better.
Yeah, and I think I've been quite thorough and picky in what I've said about the goals. And like I said, Eddie and Ronald Koeman and on the TV last night, they were praising the goals. So maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought. But
certainly, yeah. for one striker to be able to overpower our whole back line there, it is not good at any level. And so, of course, there's huge room for improvement. Yeah, I think that's some of the battles we face this year, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, and we've certainly conceded worse goals in recent weeks, which isn't really much of a positive, but it's a tiny one. So I suppose, like yourself and most other Bournemouth fans at this point, because we certainly dipped at the end of the first half, starting to worry. Is this going to be another rout and even worse against Southampton? And that brings us on to the system Eddie played in the first half with one up front. And Glenn Murray's been criticised a bit. He was criticised yesterday in the ground by the Bournemouth fans around me and subsequently on various platforms. I feel that he's been unfairly criticised because he's been asked to play a role that just simply isn't suitable for him. Because to play as the lone striker up front, and he's getting the ball over the top most of the time, you need pace. And everybody knows he doesn't have pace. It's not a secret. When we had Lewis Grabban playing in that position a couple of seasons ago, he was fantastic at it, I thought. And it was, his pace he was very fit as well, was one of his main things. And of course, Callum Wilson would equally be able to do that job and did for us quite a few times last season away from home. But Glenn Murray, they showed it. You said you didn't watch it, but they showed it on the telly last night. He's actually asking for the ball to feet, and we're hitting it over the top, and he's just not going to get there. The players, the Southampton defenders, midfielders are quicker, and that's not his game. His game is ball to feet. He's got good control, and also he's good in the air. And so I'm not really sure. Again, who am I to second guess Eddie Howe on this, particularly obviously with the amount of success Eddie's had. But I'm not sure if that system is going to work with Glenn Murray as the lone striker up front. And Eddie clearly recognised this going into the second half. But I mean, do you think Murray was at fault yesterday, or do you think it was just simply a case of that's not going to work with him playing that role?
I think you're right. Certainly during the game, I would have been one of those people who was around you criticising him. But having had time to think about it after the game and listen to you now, it does make me think that actually you're completely right in that he is playing a role that is not designed for him. I think, if anything, and you're right about Lewis Grabban as well, is that you have to be a certain type of player to play in that position. I think gone are the days when you just throw a big strong man up front. This is a position. This isn't actually a position for a goal scorer. On paper, he's our best, striker and goal scorer in the squad. Taking fitness into account. But that's not. I don't think the value lies in his ability to score goals. The person who plays in that position, their value is being able to pull defences around. The passion to really run for lost causes or send defenders in directions to allow the rest of your team to press forward. And I think that's where he struggled, is that's not what he's for. And Lewis Grabban, for the fact that he can't get in the Norwich team, so why is he the right striker for us? But actually, saying that, if you put him in that position instead of Glenn Murray, the value that he would bring to that role would be completely different, and that's why someone else in that position. And I think that's what King showed when he came on. For King, for all the criticism that he's had so far this season, when he came on, he demonstrated the difference between putting a player of Glenn Murray's ability against someone like King, who will run, who has potentially the need to demonstrate his role in the team. But he in the second half there, he did a great job of doing what Murray didn't do in the first half, and I think that's what that role needs. As I say, it's not that Murray's doing anything particularly wrong. It's just he's, in my eyes, not the right player to do the job that is required of him there.
This podcast is sponsored by the White Bear Micropub in Southbourne-on-Sea. No loud music, no TVs, and no ringtones. Just good ale, good conversation, and good times. Just like a pub used to be. Check out www.thewhitebear.co.uk. So, as you said, Eddie took unusually decisive action at half-time. He normally waits till 60 minutes has passed, and he changed the personnel and he changed the system somewhat in that Glenn Murray, as we were saying, wasn't really having any success in the role he'd been asked to play. Went off. Mark Pugh went off. Pugh looked a bit, I don't know, he didn't really look himself, and there's been some doubts about is he 100% fit, and he brought on Junior Stanislas and Josh King, who, whatever you might say about them, you can't say they don't offer pace. So, and we looked a different side altogether. We were clearly a better team in the second half. I'm not sure what was said at half-time. I suspect it was not one of Eddie's calmer half-time team talks. The way that he commented in his interviews after the game on how they didn't deserve the applause we gave them at the end and the support we gave them throughout the game following their first half performance suggested that he was a little upset at half time. I mean, I don't think he's one of those to read the riot act regularly, because it just doesn't work if you do it time and time again, but I think it's possible that may have happened yesterday. And it was just, well, it wasn't the classic game of two halves because we didn't score any goals, but we were just at half time I was really thinking, here we go again, this is going to be 4-5-0, but nothing of the sort was going to happen. When you look at our second half performance, we were better on the ball, we had much more possession, we were camped in their half. Obviously we had the pace, and we didn't have any penetration. We had a few half chances. I don't think we had a shot on target until the 86th minute, but it was definitely encouraging watching that second half, wasn't it?
Yeah, it really was. And I think you're right that some words must have been said at halftime. I think Harry Arter said something in the paper this morning about some words being said at halftime, and home truths. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but as you say, it doesn't help to do this every single time. But I think when Eddie has some words to say, I think it takes a lot for that to happen. Certainly, that's what the impression I get, and it looks like it worked. I think that's what we needed as supporters and watching that game as well. Had we come out and it been very much the same, it would have been really quite concerning. But knowing that we still have it in us, despite our injuries, to take games to teams, even in this scenario, it was really good to see. And whilst we were obviously lacking that final ability to score goals, statistically, that game really turned around in terms of possession, attempts on goal, not necessarily on target, rather, but certainly increasing the strike rate anyway.
Yeah, I think the most telling of those statistics in the second half, and in some ways I'm clutching at straws, was that Pella didn't have a single touch in the final 30 yards of our half in the second half. And he's obviously dominant in the first half. They were unable to get the ball to him and forward in the second half. And although we were roundly criticised for our performance in the first half, although I have my doubts about how accurate that was, I think that the second half performance, we were more dominant compared to Southampton's dominance over us in the first half, of course, barring the actual ability to score any goals, which is the kind of elephant in the room over that one. I mean, we had a few chances. Dan Gosling shot over. Junior Stanislas had a shot block. Junior Stanislas took a free kick, which from where I was looked really close. When I saw it again, it was probably 2 or 3 yards wide. But we also were kind of looking a little bit like we were doing what we did last season, but it worked last season in that we wanted to play the ball around, really intricate passing moves, maybe taking 1 or 2 passes too many before getting the shot off, and they were successfully packing their box and the edge of their box with defenders and midfielders, and there was just too much traffic for us to play through them like that. Adam Smith had a bit of a well, I wouldn't say it was a nightmare, but made a few what felt like errors from watching the game in terms of his decision making. At least 3 times he seemed to go on one of his little runs, or at one point he got the ball from a corner, and then he had the opportunity to play the ball in to one of our players, and he just completely played it to the wrong place. And then there was one when there was a corner, and Matt Ritchie gave him the ball, and he just went charging in along kind of parallel 2 or 3 yards from the touchline, and he was kind of clean through, and he could have taken a shot, but he crossed it instead of shooting and testing the goalkeeper. And it was just things like that it was very frustrating to watch. And I think Eddie is finding a way to make it work. I hope he is, with the personnel that he now has at his disposal for the next 2 months. But yeah, I suppose if I was the manager, it's unlikely they're going to appoint me the manager anytime soon, but if I was the manager, one thing I would say is we need to shoot a little bit earlier, don't we?
Yeah, there was a case there, I think, towards the latter part of the game where it did feel like we were trying to almost walk it in. But I think that comes across as we're so desperate not to lose possession and to keep this attack going that we start overworking the ball a bit, and that results in ultimately some wayward passing or some odd decisions here or there. Certainly there was some crossing in from Smith that wasn't quite working out, and I think it's potentially a victim of the fact that we know how good it is when Francis puts the ball in, and we're therefore missing that. I don't think Smith did anything overtly wrong. I think he is just the victim of having a great defender, a great right back, waiting to fill that space once he can have it back again. I don't, not taking anything away from the second half performance, because it was really a fantastic way of dealing with that first half. But obviously I can't help feeling the fact that because Southampton had won that game at half time, our ability to have the ball more did flatter us a bit. Had it still been 0-0, it would have been anything like that. So I think we gained a bit from there, but that, as I say, it's not taking anything away from the fact that it was a significantly better performance in the second half. We just needed to be able to convert.
Yeah, I think the real test of whether or not Southampton had perhaps half taken their foot off the gas would have come if we'd have got one goal midway through the half, and then we would have seen whether or not we were actually pinning them into their own half, or they were thinking, well, we're 2-0 up. We've probably got something left in the tank if we need it, but we'll just see how this half goes and not push ourselves too hard.
Yeah.
I mean, it's impossible to say, but yeah, that's certainly a possibility. Some positive things that came out of that half, and well, the whole of the game. I mean, the main one for me was the return of Harry Arter. It's been much anticipated since he's been unable to play. He got injured playing for Ireland against England, didn't he? Or certainly when he was away with Ireland around the time of that game. He's come back in. He looked. I didn't go to Liverpool. I watched it on the telly. He looked pretty good there. I thought he was very good yesterday. He almost looks like he's back to his old self. The harrying, the range of passing, the ability to dominate the midfield, the tackling, which is always one he's got to be careful of. But sometimes they come back though, and they're all right for the first 2 or 3 games because they get by on adrenaline, and then they tend to fade. But at the moment, it looks like a real bonus having him back in the team, which I don't know. I'm struggling to think of a way it could be overestimated, and I think if we can keep him fit. And he could go the full 90 minutes soon, maybe even against Newcastle. I think if we're well ahead in that game, hopefully we will be. Then he might get taken off again. It's going to make a huge difference for us, isn't it?
Oh, I think absolutely, definitely. Just seeing him making those surging runs forward, or getting a bit of space on the edge of the area when that's where he's at his most deadly. That's when you get that little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, as knowing that we've got so many players out, and you see him come back and you think, yeah, this is exactly what we need. Eddie mentioned something in an interview a few days ago where he said that he felt that we'd lost a little bit of identity and balance at the moment. And I think Harry has demonstrated what balance has been missing, and that's that ability to surge from midfield and really have that bite that he gives. So when we saw that he was going to be involved at Liverpool, that really made the difference for me in terms of our prospects in that game and going forward over the next few weeks. It's vital that we get him back, and it's great that day has finally come.
And a surprise one, I suppose we saw it start against Liverpool, is the potential resurrection of Junior Stanislas. He did all right against Liverpool. He had one gilt-edged chance right at the start. He's been given responsibility to take some of the set pieces, which quite surprised me. I have heard that he's the fittest player at the club. I remember reading somewhere they did one of these beep test things, which sound dreadful. I think I'd hate to do one of those, but he was the player that came out on top. Now, being the fittest player doesn't by any stretch of the imagination make you the best player, and he has, it's fair to say, been frustrating to watch since he signed for the club. But he's just looking sharper, happier. He seems more confident. I mean, we've seen a bit of a revival from Dan Gosling this season, and hopefully we're going to see Junior Stanislas do a kind of similarly surprising thing.
Yeah, I think what Stanislas, his thing that he needs to solve is consistency, because we get this in flashes, don't we, where he has just a brilliant performance, and yet you move into the next game and it doesn't carry through. And we've already had it this season where, I mean, given it was Hartlepool, but he absolutely dominated that game. And if I may be misremembering, so tell me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's when he then had to play against Norwich in the following game. And it was just such a stark contrast. Of course, it's Hartlepool and then one is Norwich. But in terms of his involvement in the game, it was completely different. So I'm hoping now, obviously we had some great opportunities against Liverpool in the week. I remember 3 particular opportunities. There was the one he had in those first 5 minutes. There was the free kick that was just creeping in inside the post, and then there was the header that was Bogdan had to do a point blank save with. So he's had a great performance against Liverpool, and to see him come on against Saints and also do well was good, because it could have easily been a case of going to the next game and not carry that through. So I really hope that keeps going for him as well. And I think him getting this opportunity to move slightly more centrally rather than being out the wing might work for him as well, because I think he might operate potentially. I mean, I don't see it in anything other than these fleeting few minutes, but potentially his opportunity to operate maybe behind the striker a little bit more centrally might be a good position for him.
Yeah, the potential positive for players like him and King, Gosling has benefited from this somewhat this season. Adam Smith's come into the team a bit more, though we saw quite a bit of him last year. Of all the injuries plus the dip in results and performances, is that they are going to see more game time, and then you can think, well, fair enough, a player may need 3-4 games to get the rust shaken off and get into the swing of it. I mean, football supporters and managers, it's a pretty unforgiving environment. So you put in a bad performance, you could well find yourself out of the team. And that's happened quite a few times to Junior Stanislas. But I've got a feeling we might see a bit more of him. I suppose the decision for Eddie is, will he start him against Newcastle or will he start Mark Pugh? I guess it depends on more than one factor, fitness being a factor. I'm not sure what's going on with Pugh, but he just hasn't looked himself the past couple of times I've seen him play. But yeah, it'd be great. I mean, I think lots of people would... I don't think we're quite at the stage of eating humble pie yet, but lots of people would have to have a slice of humble pie if Junior Stanislas came good. But I'd be quite happy to eat my portion of it if it was for the benefit of the team.
Yeah, me too. I think he's definitely there, and he's great for free kicks. He is a real threat, and for him to really turn that into consistent performances, I think would be of huge benefit for us, and I'd love to see that happen.
One highlight, if you can call it a highlight, of the second half was the red card for Wanyama. Lee Tomlin, who came on for Harry Arter, he's another one that I'd like to see a bit more of, but I think circumstances are conspiring against him starting games. He ran through a couple of challenges, and then Wanyama made a very clumsy challenge. It was real Sunday League stuff, and just brought him down and gave the referee no option but to send him off. And he didn't protest. He just kind of shrugged, shook his head a bit, and walked off the pitch and knew that the game was up. And I mean, that was in the 77th minute, so there's, I guess, about 15-16 minutes of play left in total. And he thought, well, maybe we could get a goal. Maybe we would have 8 minutes or so to try and get a second one and get an equaliser and all this sort of thing, but it never really came. They defended well, as I said already. They seemed to get plenty of players behind the ball, and even though they struggled to get the ball out of their half, they didn't struggle to keep the ball away from their goal. Although that said, they only had 2 shots on target as well, although they had plenty of other shots, and the 2 shots they did have on target ended up in the net. We didn't have a shot on target until the 86th minute. Lee Tomlin again came in from the left, and I wouldn't say he hit it straight at Stecklenburg, but it was quite near him, and he made a decent enough save, and then Josh King had one as well from 20 yards. Now King was another one who came on and impressed perhaps not as much as Stanislas, but just I always feel like I'm clutching at straws when I'm saying things like this at the moment, but he just looked a little bit sharper and a little bit more of a threat. And although he hasn't scored any goals, and you're not looking at him thinking he's about to turn into Callum Wilson, I think he's showing signs of improvement. And I think what will happen is on next Saturday, I struggle to remember what days we're playing on now. It's an early kickoff against Newcastle, isn't it? I think that Eddie's going to go with him and Murray again up front, and I actually surprised to find myself saying this, but in the current circumstances, I actually think that's the right decision.
Yeah, I think so too. I I actually quite like him as a player. I fear he's becoming a bit of a scapegoat, and I don't think it's all his fault. Well, of course, it's not all his fault. But what I mean is he's become a victim of the fact that in the absence of Callum Wilson, you'll look at him and go, well, he's fast. He should be able to score goals as well. And he's a Norwegian international. That surely that's enough. But I think he has some way to go. But I can see that he is going in the right direction, and I think it will work for him eventually. And when he came on at the weekend, I think he demonstrated exactly what Eddie sees in him and what he's for. So I do want to see him getting more game time, and I do want to see that turning into goals. I'm not one of those people who is jumping on his back and asking why he's not delivering immediately. But I can see where some comments are coming from. But I think I agree he should be starting against Newcastle, because that's what we need from players in that position right now.
Yeah, I think that his stock is rising, and his performances, there's slight improvement. But also in the light of people, by people I mean fans, myself included, adjusting to the situation we find ourselves in now. I mean, we're recording this on the 2nd of November, which by my calculations is 6 months to the day since we beat Charlton and took the title. And, times have clearly changed quite a lot since then. But we've had to make an adjustment. And at first, when the results were dipping and fingers were being pointed at players, and King was near the front of the queue, if not at the front of the queue. But in the light of the injuries, obviously people now know that our choices are limited, so we need to get behind these players, whether we like it or not, and hopefully we will like it. And also, in the circumstances, we've had to try different things to try and turn the results around. It might not work straight away. Eddie's, as I said earlier, I think still trying to find a new way to make it work with the squad that he has at his disposal, because we can't bring anybody in, unfortunately. And hopefully King, and Stanislas another one, is gonna benefit from that. And that sort of brings me on to the whole mentality thing. And I mentioned this a bit in the podcast last week after the Tottenham game. I think we have now, I don't know if the word is successfully, but we have now reached a point where we're no longer expecting anything out of this season apart from one long, hard struggle. And we need to somehow manage to claw enough points together between now and Christmas to stay in touch. And then hopefully there might be some improvement come the window, although I don't think we should hang too much on that, because it may or may not work out. But yeah, one long struggle for the entire season. The other thing I think we're beginning to adjust to is the whole Premier League big time aspect. I think at first we were, it was a fairy tale, and even like we played Aston Villa on the first day of the season, and it was just, we were in dreamland. That's all kind of, I wouldn't say it turned into a nightmare, but the dream's over now, and also the adjustment to playing in the big stadiums against the big name players. I think we're making progress mentally on that as well, in as much as, we've played recently City, Tottenham, Liverpool and Southampton. Big teams, big games, big stadiums, etc. And so we've got Newcastle next week. And if maybe 2 seasons ago we'd have drawn Newcastle in the Cup, it would have been seen as a huge fixture for us. And a real sort of glamour tie. It wouldn't have quite been like the first time we got Liverpool in the FA Cup, which was nearly 2 years ago now, but it still would have been seen as a pretty big deal. Now, of course, we go into the game with Newcastle and people are thinking nothing of the sort. The only thing people are thinking about, and I'm sure this includes the squad, is winning that game, which, although seems obvious, I think does indicate that our mentality has changed, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we certainly have changed in the way that we deal with games, and that feeling of being, strangers or new into the Premier League, I think that's gone now. We are here and we have a job to do, and that involves beating one of the biggest clubs in the country. and that's what comes with the territory. And I think we can do it. Yes, okay, we've had 3 defeats on back to back now, but that means nothing when you go into a game like this. And I know that we can do it. I know that we're capable. It just comes down to being able to deal with, if we go a goal down, that is not an indication of how this game is going to end, and just keep on going. And with players like Arter coming back, with King showing his potential in the second half at the weekend, these little things, if they start coming together, and I agree with you that Eddie is, he's finding his way with this squad that's at his disposal, then it could all come to a head, and Newcastle, we could finally crack it and push on from here. I hope that's true anyway.
And the thing that has, well, one of the things that has kept me, well, feeling surprised, really, is every time I look at the league table, I notice that we're not actually in the bottom 3. No matter how badly things seem to be going. Newcastle drew with Stoke. I think that they could have won, but they didn't. They had a lot of chances, but Stoke's goalie did us a favour and kept them out. Sunderland got hammered yesterday, and of course Sunderland beat Newcastle. Not that that's going to mean anything when we play them. We're recording this during the Tottenham-Aston Villa game. It's half-time as we speak, and Tottenham are winning 2-0. So, despite our pretty bad run recently, I mentioned about us getting cut off, and I've mentioned it a few times, we're nowhere near being cut adrift at the moment, and we're not even plummeting down the table. We've sort of been on 17th place for what seems like ages. It's probably only 2 or 3 weeks, but it is, if we win against Newcastle, everything's going to look a lot rosier, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely, and we certainly we haven't even conceded the most goals in the division, which you'd think on back to back 5-1 losses, you'd think, well, surely we are the worst at something, but it doesn't seem like that. And as you say, even with this run of results, we're still not in the bottom 3. That goes to show how poor the other 3 clubs have been as well. But what we mustn't forget is that, okay, we lost by some considerable goals, but that was to Man City and that was to Spurs. These weren't small clubs. These are clubs that we could have got those sorts of results at any time against them. So yeah, we've been battered a bit by injuries and things like that, but that doesn't mean that this is going to be an uphill battle all the time. And the Newcastle game may well have come at a point that will reaffirm to us that we can compete here and that we shouldn't necessarily fear falling into this bottom 3, although obviously that's a very real possibility. But yeah, we are not the worst club here, I don't think. We are just faced with a challenge that comes with the territory.
Yeah, I think that one thing that we hopefully won't do, but I can see all the teams, well, 2 of them have done it already. Sunderland and Villa have changed their manager. Villa have appointed Remy Gard today, apparently. Newcastle haven't yet. If they lose to us, that might be a significant nail in Steve McLaren's coffin, although they would have to pay him off quite handsomely.
Oh. And he's on the board as well, isn't he?
Yeah, he's not going to vote for his own sacking just yet. But I think Eddie, well, I'm assuming Eddie's job is safe. And so far, we'll have to see what happens with Aston Villa. Sunderland haven't had the new manager bounce. I mean, I was very pleasantly surprised when I heard their result when I got to St Mary's yesterday. And there's other teams down there. Norwich, who we lost to, which probably was our worst performance of the season, despite the results we've had recently. I think we can, although we're all enjoying it, I think we can probably take Chelsea out of the equation, because at some point they're going to put enough points together to start climbing up the table. But then you look up, you've got teams like Stoke, Swansea, West Brom. I mean, Watford are above them. Not taking a great deal of pleasure in seeing them do well, but they are doing a lot better than us at the moment. But the gaps aren't huge, and we've got Newcastle. So I'm sort of saying, well, if we beat them, it's a big if. Then we've got the international break. Then we've got Swansea, and things could improve. And of course, the other thing is that people have a lot of the as opposed to this time 6 months ago, a lot of the chats I've been having recently with people who don't really support Bournemouth or support another team, but obviously live in the area or whatever, have been all about, can you stay up? Or sometimes I even get, you're going to go down, aren't you? And we could go down, but we've only played 11 games. There's loads of games to go. There's a huge part of the season to go, and we could turn it around. And we've definitely got the right manager to turn it around. We hopefully we'll have the right squad at some point. I mean, he gets the best out of the players, and he makes it work. And this is a huge challenge. I mean, you could say it's the biggest challenge of his career, but I think keeping us in the Football League was what was the biggest challenge of his career. But there's so far to go. When you get a few bad results, it's so easy to look at the situation as being really, really bleak. If there was like 2 games to go and we were 4 points from safety, then I would be, there's no way I'd be saying any of this. I pretty much think we were down. I mean, especially with the fixtures we got at the end of the season. But it's such a long way until the end of the season. And of course, one thing we also forget is that all the other teams around us have to play the big teams as well, and can slip up, and they have to play each other. So it's not, I mean, obviously we can do ourselves big favour by actually winning some games, but it's far too early to say, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. I do have to, you're right in that just because these things are happening now, that doesn't mean it's going to happen for the whole season. It is just 11 games. And I do have to remind myself that, okay, so the worst thing that's going to happen is we'll get relegated from the Premier League. We're not being relegated out of the league, which is, what we are more, I wouldn't say typically experienced to, but has been a potentially more concerning problem over recent years. So I think we have a good sort of problem to deal with. The thing that really concerns me is I don't want it to have become a season of what ifs. We were finally presented with this opportunity, or finally earned this opportunity to play in the top division. And I would hate for us to look back, having been relegated, going, what if we'd had Callum Wilson? What if we still had, Gradle? Name any of them. Our entire spine. What if we'd had that the whole time and we weren't faced with this injury crisis? And I don't like to make injuries an excuse or anything like that, but this is the most horrific run of injuries I've ever witnessed of any football team. As I say, I don't want that to become what ifs, where we knew that had we been given a level playing field, or at least the opportunity to play our best possible team, that this could have been entirely different, and that would be a huge shame. I would far rather go down with our full squad than to have gone down with a team that had been decimated by injury, where we knew we weren't giving a proper account of ourselves in front of the world's media. Yeah, should we go down, that will always be pointed at as the main reason. Of course, we'll never know, because you say, if we had our full squad, don't like to think it could be true, but we could, and we haven't been relegated yet, obviously, but we could have still been relegated, with everybody fit for the entire season. So you will never know that. But I think you have to or we all have to put the injury thing, you kind of have to park that thought away, because there's, another 27 games to go, and we'll be lucky if we see Gradle and Wilson in any of those games. And we won't be seeing Mings, although he hadn't really played much. And, there's obviously going to be other injuries. Tommy Elphick's out for a while. And you just have to somehow get on with it.
Yeah. It'd just be a shame if we end up having to spend, we're under the assumption that Eddie will spend in January, but he may have to spend big in order to effectively do something. And if that still doesn't work, then we could be heavily laden by a very large spending history and have nothing for it. But as I agree with you, there's no point dwelling on fears of relegation or anything like that. We are still in the what is that, the first quarter of the season, or just slightly beyond the first quarter of the season, and there's a long way to go. And as we know from from past seasons, you look at those first few games and it bared no resemblance to what the entire season looked like. And there's plenty of space for this to not just turn around, but be a completely different story to the story that we're getting right now.
I think that's the perfect note to wind it up this evening, Chris. I think that that's the message we want to hear, and we should all try and remember that, even when we're shouting at the players on the pitch in our frustration when they misplace a pass and all the other things that have been going on recently. But thanks ever so much for coming on the show. Always good to hear your considered thoughts, and hopefully we'll speak to you again before the end of the season.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Great stuff there from Chris. And as with all the podcasts during our recent run of defeats, I always feel better for getting it off my chest, and I hope Chris found it similarly therapeutic. Just before we sign off, I wanted to point you in the direction of Cherries fan Clive Allen, who's going to be attending our upcoming match against Everton wearing just his red Speedo swimming trunks. Clive's raising money for the Woodlands Hospice Charitable Trust and will be collecting donations in the Queen's Park pub before both our home fixtures against Newcastle and Everton. You can also donate through Clive's Virgin Money page, details of which are on the All Departments podcast website at www.alldepartments.wordpress.com. Apologies for the absence of a Liverpool podcast. It wasn't for the lack of trying, but I was in the nation's busy capital last week and it didn't quite work out. Unfortunately, we won't need to take heed of our progress in the League Cup any longer, so our sole focus until the FA Cup casts its magic in January is battling it out in the Premier League. So up the cherries in all departments, and goodbye! All Departments is sponsored by the White Bear Micro Pub on Southbourne Grove, the perfect pre- and post-game venue to chat about the game and only a 25-minute walk to the ground, or there's a bus stop right outside. Wear your AFCB shirt on any match day and receive 30p off each pint. Check out www.thewhitebear.co.uk.